Being is supreme happiness. Yourself, as you truly are is the happiness that all desire. If you abide in the knowledge of the self as being truly is, then you are completely satisfied, and you yourself are the satisfaction. If there is misidentification as an ego, an individual, there is suffering. And it is the ego alone that suffers, for the self is ever beyond all of that. As the ego is not a reality, but purely illusory, the sufferer and the suffering are likewise of the nature of illusion. Based upon that supposition of I, if there is further misidentification with various thoughts and the body, there is unhappiness, suffering. Such is not natural. Such is of the nature of illusion. The reality of the self is supreme happiness. And for that happiness to shine continuously, always, and completely for you, you have only to know yourself as you truly are, ceasing to misidentify with a body, a mind, or an ego. With this supreme happiness, you will be satisfied. Nothing else, not anything of this world, can provide such satisfaction. For nothing else can give you what is innately yours. Being is bliss. If we think of happiness as something that comes and goes, or something that will be acquired, or will be experienced in some objective sense, that's not quite it. The actual nature of happiness is being, existence itself. And if you know yourself as just this undefined, unconfined, absolute existence, your happiness is complete. So then, devoting yourself to the realization of the truth and inquiring within to know yourself is a very joyful thing. In numerous shastras, scriptures, it is stated again and again that the self-realized sage is satisfied with whatever comes unsought. The common understanding of this is that due to his detachment, he is satisfied with whatever occurs to him in this world, for which he applies no effort to acquire. The deeper understanding is that having known himself, and thus being the bliss that is supreme, which is the eternally unsought, for it is not an object. He is happy at heart always. And because of such profound happiness, because of his identification as being the bliss itself, he is utterly indifferent to whatever occurs phenomenally to the body and such. This profound satisfaction, this complete happiness, awaits you, so to speak. And all you need do is deeply inquire to know yourself as you are. As nothing in this world can give you yourself, so nothing can provide you with the happiness that is yours. As Sri Bhagavan has pointed out, when happiness seems to shine in the midst of some objective experience, it is really the happiness of your own self that is shining. There is only one kind of happiness, and you are that. Just as there's only one kind of existence, and you are that. For happiness that is utterly non-dependent, know yourself. For that happiness that leaves no other happiness to be desired, know yourself.
just applying one part of your discourse, could it be of use to say that the forbearance that Adi Shankara recommends in the four requisites more truly then comes from the turning away from objectivity itself and being happiness rather than seeking to obtain it?
It's in the very nature of true sadhana to be an expression or reflection of the Absolute only in the context of practice. So by forbearance, one arrives at that, or comes to know that, which is ever unmoved, unattached, unaffected, which is none other than the reality itself. Just as one realizes true knowledge by means of knowledge.
Reflecting on the reading on Friday night, where there was this dialogue on a samsari and a sannyasi, and I kind of liked it very much. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said that if you think you are a sannyasi, then you are not one. And if you don't think you are a samsari, then you are not one. And actually your discourse this morning kind of clearly showed why I think that there is bondage in a samsara. As a samsari, there is this notion that it's a bound state, and you clearly said what is the thought process that goes on that we think it's a bound state. And there is this idea that there is not supreme happiness there, but as you started, that being is the supreme happiness, but somehow there is this feeling that the state of being in a samsara is lacking that peace and that happiness that you spoke of. But I guess it comes back to the whole samsara is in the mind. As Bhagavan in one place mentions that the mind moves and it is samsara.
That's right.
So, actually that and what you said, it all, I guess all the while you keep telling us the same thing, that we need to see that it's all in the mind and we are just mistaking where this happiness is, and the body could be anywhere, but how the state of the mind is what matters. This is what my understanding is.
Yes. And it is a matter of identification. If you misidentify with the body, no matter where the body is, there will be samsara. If you do not misidentify with the body, then wherever the body is, there is no samsara. In the mind's movement, you seem to get caught up. Misidentification with the mind is samsara. The samsara is totally in the mind. If you are free of misidentification with any thought, what would bind? Without inquiry, it all seems so solid and real. With a little inquiry, it is seen to be an illusion, made up of the stuff of the mind, just thought. If you are not a samsari, that means you are not a body, not a mind, not an ego. Without those misidentifications, where is the scope for samsara? And if there is no scope for samsara now, there will not be return to it later. It is imaginary even now. It does not lie in wait for you later. This is so concerning samsara, however it is defined, whether it as worldly life and attachment and suffering, or as the tract of transmigration. If you are the unborn bodiless self, how can there be transmigration? If you are the unborn bodiless self, how can you have a worldly life? No matter what the activity of the body is. Seen in this way, the living being is divine, as mentioned in Upadeshasara. And that divinity will never perish.
It's wonderful to hear you mention about that, because whenever a friend hears me say that I don't believe in reincarnation, they say, how can that be? And so my response to that is, how can there possibly be, if all that exists is the unborn, eternally unborn, one, presence, how can there possibly be a serious conversation about rebirth with a straight face, so to speak? So thank you for reaffirming that truth.
Yes, if there is birth, there is death, and if death, life, and if life, death again, etc. But if one has never been born,
Exactly.
then the essential existence has no cycle, no beginning, no end.
Yes.
I went to a good friend's birthday party last night. And I was, during the party, and since I was really reflecting on, have I had a birthday? There is the birth of the body, but is that my birth? And does the death of the body mean something happens to me? So I went and read the second invocatory verse in the 40 verses on reality, which I'll try to paraphrase it. For those who out of the fear of death seek refuge in the conqueror of death, for them the I thought is the first to perish, after which there isn't even room for the thought of death. So I think the key in that is to understand what that I is that perishes. And so I kept asking myself, like when I go to sleep, there's no fear of the loss of the body in the world. So in the waking state, why do I have any connection with the body? Or why do I have any concern about its eventual demise? So when I inquire, that's the one thing that I keep trying to get to the bottom of. Am I the body? And let me describe what it is like when I think I'm actually inquired as compared to some other activity that I would call inquiry. It has the feeling of pointing so directly at myself that I kind of swallow myself up in it. It has a feeling of drawing the mind back in to where it feels like I almost fall back into myself. And sometimes it has kind of a surprising effect, like, oh, that's who you are. Feeling it's both surprising and it's both kind of like, well, that's not really a surprise. I've always sort of. But there's something that I'm not doing in my practice to get rid of the body that I don't know by discussing it if I'm going to figure that out or I just need to inquire more. But I have not gotten rid of that misidentification with the body.
What constitutes it?
I don't know. It's more like an inadvertent sort of, oh, okay, I'm doing things. But that's, I guess, downstream from.
Yes, the idea of being the performer of action is utterly dependent on the I am the body concept.
So what is it actually made of? What is it made of? The body, I am the body concept.
You've been instructed that you are not the body, and it is only a misidentification that makes it appear otherwise. So what composes or constitutes the misidentification?
Well, at its core is thinking I'm an individual. If that's not there, it's really hard to misidentify with the body. So,
Yes, where there's no scope for I, where the I that is the first to perish is not, there certainly cannot be the I am the body misidentification. However, it is possible in the course of sadhana to first disidentify from the body and then see the egoless truth. It would be ridiculous to say, I must remain misidentified with the body until I see that there's no ego.
yeah, you wouldn't give.
Especially because as long as you have the I am the body concept, the ego will seem to flourish.
Can it get anywhere that way? So this is good. I'm trying to see what is it actually made out of, this thing called the misidentification with the body. How am I actually pulling that off, so to speak? Or pulling it on, maybe.
Yes, examine that thoroughly. Spiritual instruction that describes the forms or patterns of ignorance is given not to build up a concrete concept that such patterns of ignorance actually exist, but to destroy the belief in them.
That's a very different way to approach it than thinking there actually is something there real that I'm going to get rid of, as opposed to questioning its validity to begin with.
The entire purpose of spiritual instruction and practice thereof is to question that validity. To leave that validity unquestioned is the same stuff of which samsara is made. Baseless suppositions to which one is attributed belief.
So I'm not actually sure what it's made out of when I start to look. If I start at it like it's a real thing, well, that's okay. But to actually get a hold of what it's made out of, I can't actually find what I think it's made out of. I'm thinking that it's made out of something. But those thoughts really don't hold up into anything that I can say where the connection actually lies. Which makes me ask even further, why am I making that? Why am I making that? I don't know if why is a very good approach, but
Who would be better?
I think I've heard that before. So who is? That's definitely better. Because when I go there, it's like, who am I talking about?
And who are you really? And can that be a body?
Yeah, I don't experience my existence as a body. Because as we speak, my existence gets clearer. And if I try to find the bodiness of that, there ain't no body home. There's no body in that.
Then you have the answer to your original question. And in light of what we were reading of the Maharshi's instruction on Friday night, learn it by steadfast inquiry and by satsang.
Master, this consideration about our relationship to the body and birth and death has been very helpful. And there's a line that I read in the Bhagavad Gita recently where Krishna says, only the unenlightened or the uninformed lament for the dying or the dead. And I really liked that communication. It seemed to affirm that death of the body is not to be troubled with. And I appreciate your ongoing discourse along those lines, because it seems like all of us, to some degree, have to relate to that.
Practice the immortal knowledge that is expressed in the Bhagavad Gita, especially in the second chapter, as alluded to by you. Practice this in such a way that it remains self-evident and eternal for you.
If all samsara is in the mind, then it seems the next question would be, where's the mind? almost seems that we can look at this or the samsara and still keep the mind that imagines it intact.
What is it made of? And who knows it? If the mind is constituted of thought, the knower is beyond it. For thoughts do not know themselves. That which is beyond thought remains forever undefined by thought. It does not have the form of thought. Can that which never has the form of thought enter samsara?
So the thoughts themselves that consider samsara are part and parcel of the samsara.
But there is something that is not a thought. It is only one, for multiplicity is a product of thinking. That one which is thought-free is yourself. Vasishta says that the entire Mahakasha, the great space, is contained within Chidakasha, the mind space. And the Chidakasha is contained within the Chidakasha. That is, the mind space is contained within the space of consciousness. Nothing contains the space of consciousness, though. And in its actual nature, it transcends the ideas of a container and a contained.
It's a very helpful description.
That great space, which is never cooped up inside anything, in which everything is contained, and yet again which contains nothing but itself. That is you. That is your consciousness. If there is a mind, it is only in that. But in that itself, which is entirely undifferentiated and homogeneous, how can we speak of a mind?
So you asked, or Jim said why, and you said who is probably better. You know, I feel like I was meditating on that because I feel like I make that same mistake all the time. And I was just reflecting on it. I was thinking that I need to rely on this, as you say, direct knowledge. And that isn't a why. I mean, it sort of is, but I feel like I forget that all the time, so everything becomes a why.
If asking the reason why leads you back in a subjective direction to find out who you are, it is all right. If asking why merely leads you to the belief that you're dealing with objective things, with objective causes, regarding bondage and samsara, etc., then that is just so much thinking, and asking who am I would be far better.
So the key, though, is when you to say, who am I? So even that, I think I sort of make that into something objective.
Who makes it into something objective?
That one, I guess, I gotta know.
All the while one is thinking, I. Who am I, anyway?
Yeah. Yeah, that is way more directing. It's... How do I guess... your whole discourse, I feel like, is the how, because you said, you're just kind of going over it, where ultimately is happiness. And once that's known, that non-objective state, I feel like I don't know that really clear. I mean, in a certain sense, I get a glimpse of it.
Are you satisfied with anything less than yourself?
No. Because I keep coming back.
So intuitively you do know.
But I need to make that stronger.
All right. Whatever explanations you utilize, whatever scriptural texts you read and try to understand, you must comprehend them in terms of liberation and not conceive of them in terms of bondage. If spiritual instruction, received, read, etc., merely pointed out how one was bound, there'd be no need for it, because one already knows that by alternative means.
Yeah, exactly.
Conceiving in worldly experience.
Yeah.
Rather, the spiritual instruction, the scriptures, etc., are all for pointing out your liberation from the imagined bondage. Likewise with asking why. If looking for the reason shows you the falsity, the falseness of delusion, it is beneficial. If it merely builds up the idea that the bondage is real, then it is only part of the same illusion. Is this clear for you?
you brought up earlier about the illusory sense of container, and the contained also was most appreciable because it brought to memory Sri Dattatreya's use of the phrase Marichijala Sanibam in the Avadut Gita, or the whole world is simply like the water contained within a mirage of water, like that. So one can actually get a good sense of what you were speaking about earlier by just reflecting or contemplating. Yes, even when we drive down the highway and see like a mirage of water on the highway on a hot sunny day, the water is not really there. So is the concrete or the cement actually contained underneath the water that's not really there?
It is somewhat silly to consider the mirage as something lying on top of the substrate, as if it were a real thing. But what is far sillier is to consider that the highway is contained within the mirage.
Right, that's what I was saying, yes.
It's just like that with the world and I.
Going back to your discussion on Friday of Satsang in the company of the holy, if I look at my experience, there seems to be just a complete dependence on it. And
Well, if there's complete dependence on it, then you don't depend on anything else. One who depends on association with Sat, existence, finds himself in due course to be that existence.
it seems like it would be an error to consider it just a phenomenal, objective occurrence.
It would be narrow and short-sighted. It is not really just a gathering of a herd of bodies in a room. What actually occurs in satsang? What actually occurs when you inquire? What actually is it when one realizes the truth? where words and thoughts turn back, unable to grasp, there is true knowledge.
So we should be really thankful for the teaching that points us in this direction.
That for which we are thankful is ours.
यथा वृक्षविपर्यासो जलाद्भवति कस्यचित् तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
Just as trees are seen by one as topsy-turvy, by reflection in water, so does one perceive the self as the body, by virtue of ignorance.
पोते न गच्छत पुंसः सर्वं भातीव चञ्चलं तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
For the person who is going in a boat, everything appears to be in motion. So does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
पीतत्वं हि यथा शुभ्रे दोषात् भवति कस्यचित् तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
Just as someone with a faulty vision sees a white thing as yellow, so does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
चक्षुर्भ्यां भ्रमशीलाभ्यां सर्वं भाति भ्रमात्मकं तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
Just as when the eyes are dizzy, everything appears as wandering, so does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
अलातं भ्रमणेनैव वर्तुलं भाति सूर्यवत् तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
Just as a firebrand, by being revolved, appears to be circular like the sun, so does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
महत्त्वे सर्ववस्तूनाम् अणुत्वं ह्यति दूरतः तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
All things, however big in size, appear very small at a great distance. So does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
सूक्ष्मत्वे सर्वभावानां स्थूलत्वं चोपनेत्रतः तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
All things, however small in size, appear big under a magnifying glass. So does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
काच भूमौ जलत्वं वा जलभूमौ हि काचता तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
A glassy surface appears as water, and a watery surface as glass. So does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
यद्वदग्नौ मणित्वं हि मणौ वा वह्निता पुमान् तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
Just as one mistakes charcoal for a gem or a gem for charcoal, so does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
अभ्रेषु सत्सु धावत्सु सोमो धावति भाति वै तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
When the clouds are moving, the moon appears to move. So does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
यथैव दिग्विपर्यासो मोहात् भवति कस्यचित् तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
Just as the directions seem to be changed for one who is in a swoon, so does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
यथा शशी जले भाति चञ्चलत्वेन कस्यचित् तद्वदात्मनि देहत्वं पश्यत्यज्ञानयोगतः.
Just as the moon appears to someone as moving in the waters, so does one perceive the self as the body by virtue of ignorance.
एवमात्मन्यविद्यातो देहाध्यासो हि जायते स एवात्मपरिज्ञाना लीयते च परात्मनि.
Thus is the self mistaken for the body owing to ignorance. But when the self is realized, this mistake disappears in Brahman.
सर्वम् आत्मतया ज्ञातं जगत्स्थावरजङ्गमम् अभावात् सर्वभावानां देहस्य चात्मता कुतः.
The whole world, sentient and non-sentient, is realized to be only the self. How then can the various things and the various bodies be the self, since they are unreal?
நிதாகன் தன் அனுபவத்தினால் இந்நூலின் மகிமையும் இந்நூல் அனுகிரகிக்கும் குரு மகிமையும் இந்நூலில் சொன்ன ஞானம் சிவ கிருபையால் வரவேண்டுமென்றும் உரைக்கும் அத்தியாயம். மகிழ்வுடனே நிதகமுனி மற்றும் சொல்வான் மாசற்ற சத்குருவே மகேஷன் முன்னம்.
மிகவும் மகா ரகசியமாம் இந்த நூலை மெத்தவுமே கருணையினால் நினக்கு உரைத்தான்.
பகரவுணா கருணையினால் இதனை மற்றும் பரமதயா நிதியான நீயனக்கிங்கு இகழ்வரவே உரை செய்தான் உரைத்த வண்ணம் யானுமுதை இதயத்தில் இசைந்தோனானேன். தேசிகையின் நூலில் ஒரு அத்தியாயம் திருடமாக மனதிலுற கேட்டதாலே
மாசமிகு மனதினிடை மறுவானின்ற மாமாயை எனுமிருளின் திரளையெல்லாம்
மாசதனில் விளக்கியிடும் மறுக்க நான அகண்ட பர சிவஞானம் அடைந்தோ நானேன். ஈசவிதில் ஒரு கவிதை கேட்ட போதும் இருமையிலா மோட்ச சுகம் இசையலாமே. இதனில் ஒரு கவியேனும் கேட்டுணர்ந்தோர் இருமையிலா வீடுருவர் சத்தியந்தான்.
நிதமுமெல்லாம் பிரம்மம் என்றும் அது நான் என்றும் நிகழ்த்தியவோர் கவியிலுள்ள பொருளுணர்ந்தான்.
விதம் விதமாம் நூலின மற்ற பொருட்டால் வீணாக விசாரித்து வருந்த வேண்டும். அதிசயமாம் இதனிலுள்ள கவியொன்றாலே அகண்ட பர ஞானத்தை அடையலாமே. இத்திரமாம் இந்நூலை உபதேசிக்கும் இயல்புள்ள குருவான குருவனானோன்.
விஸ்தரமாய் பன்னூலை உபதேசிக்கும் விசித்திரமாம் குரவர்களாற் பெரும் பேரென்ன.
உத்தமமாம் இந்நூலை உபதேசிப்போன் உணர்வுருவாய் நின்ற பர பிரம்மம் தானாம். சத்தியமே அணுவும் இதில் சங்க இல்லை. சம்புபதம் தன்னானை சங்க இல்லை. இந்நூலை கருணையினால் உபதேசிப்போன் இணையற்ற பரசிவனே ஐயமில்லை.
இந்நூலை கருணையினால் உபதேசிப்போன் இணையற்ற அம்பிகையே ஐயமில்லை.
இந்நூலை கருணையினால் உபதேசிப்போன் இருமை மிகும் விநாயகனே ஐயமில்லை. இந்நூலை கருணையினால் உபதேசிப்போன் இலங்கியிடும் ஷண்முகனே ஐயமில்லை. அருளுடனே எவன் இதனை உபதேசிப்பன் அவன் நந்தி கேசனிதில் ஐயமில்லை.
அருளுடனே எவனிதனை உபதேசிப்பன் அவன் தத்தாத்ரேயனிதில் ஐயமில்லை.
அருளுடனே எவனிதனை உபதேசிப்பன் அவன் தட்சிணாமூர்த்தி ஐயமில்லை. அருளுடனே எவனிதனை உபதேசிப்பன் அகண்ட பர சிவனவனே ஐயமில்லை. விஸ்தரமாய் விளம்பியன இந்த நூலை வெருளறவே அருள் செய்வோன் பரசிவன்தான்.
இத்தரமாம் இந்நூலை இயம்புதற்கும் இதன் பொருளை எளிதாக தெரிவித்தார்க்கும்.
உத்தமனே நினையல்லா துலகத்தின் கண் உம்பரிலும் முனிவரிலும் ஒருவரேனும் சக்தரலார் சந்தேகம் அணுவும் இல்லை. சத்தியமே சம்புபதம் தொட்டு சொல்வேன். அருளுடனே இந்நூலை உபதேசிக்கும் ஆசிரியன் பரசிவமே ஆதலால.
குருவரனுக்கொரு காலும் அபசாரத்தை குறைவரவே உபதேசம் பெற்ற மானான்.
திரிவிதமாம் கருவிகளா செய்யக்கூடா திரவியமே முதலியதால் சக்தியுள்ள வரையிலவன் பூஜனையே செய்ய வேண்டும். வழுவற்ற குருவயலார் பந்து உண்டோ. தந்தை முதல் பந்துவெல்லாம் அனந்த தேக தருவதல்லால் அனதிபவ பந்தம் தீர்க்கார்.
சிந்தையினால் ஆய்ந்திடிலல் பந்துவெல்லாம் சிறுமை தரும் சத்துருவே ஆகா நிற்பர்.
அந்தமிலா அருள் வடிவாம் குருவோ ஒன்றால் அகண்ட பர ஞானத்தை அருளா நல்கி துவந்தமத மனதிபவ பந்தம் எல்லாம் துப்பரவே நன்றாக துடைத்து காப்பன். குரு பரனே பரமசிவன் பரேசன் தானே குரு பரனாமாகினுமே ஒரு காலத்தில்.
நிருமலமாம் பரமசிவன் முனிவுற்றாளும் நிகரில் தயா நிதியான குரவன் காப்பான்.
அருள்வடிவே திருவுருவாய் எழுந்து நின்ற ஆசிரியன் என்றேனும் முனிவுற்றானேர். திரிவிதமாம் உலகத்தும் அம்மானானை தியக்கமெல்லாம் தீர்த்தவரும் காப்பதில்லை. ஆதலினால் குருவின் பால் இந்நூலின் பால் அகில ஜகன் நாயகனாம் பரேசன் தன்பால்.
ஏதமிலா ஸ்ரத்தை மிகுந்திருப்போர் தாமே இந்நூலை பழகுவதற்குரியராவர்.
ஓதியவார் ஸ்ரத்தையுரா மூர்க்கரெல்லாம் ஒரு காலம் இந்நூலில் கவியொன்றேனும் சாதகமாய் சாருவதற்குரியராகார். சத்தியமே இதிலணுவும் சங்க இல்லை. ஜீவபர ஐக்கியமுணர் ஞானம் சேர ஸ்ரத்தையலால் மற்றவையும் மேதுவாகாது.
ஆவலுடன் பெறுகின்ற ஸ்ரத்தை ஒன்றால் அனைத்துமிலை அகண்ட பர பிரம்மம் ஒன்றே.
கேவலமாயுள்ளதென்றும் அது நாமென்றும் கிளேசமில்லா பரஞானம் கிடைப்பதன்றி மேவிய மற்றொன்றாலும் அகண்ட ஞானம் மேவமொனாதென்று மறை விளம்பிற்றன்றோ. பரமசிவன் கருணையினை பற்றினோரே பரவியமின் நூற்பொருளை அறிவரன்றி.
அரிய சிவன் கருணையுரா மூர்க்கர் என்றும் அரிதான இதன் பொருளை அறிய மாட்டார்.
சர்வமுமே இகழ்ந்து பர சிவனைத்தானே சந்ததமும் ஸ்ரத்தையுடன் தியானித்தன்னோன். கருணையினை பெற்றவரே அகண்ட ஞானம் கலப்பரன சுருதி முடி விதித்ததன்றோ.